My name is Lena Croft. For as long as I can remember, my life has been a carefully curated collection of quiet moments and predictable routines. I am an archivist at the Blackwood Archives of North Haven University, a job that suits my temperament perfectly. I find solace in the hushed reverence of the reading rooms, in the precise cataloging of history, and in the faint, vanilla-and-dust scent of aging paper. My small apartment, overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street in the city of Port Blossom, is my sanctuary, a space filled with books, soft lighting, and the gentle hum of a life lived on its own terms. My background is, on the surface, unremarkable. I grew up in a family where achievement was the primary currency of affection. My mother, a woman of formidable will and exacting standards, always measured success in tangible terms: promotions, financial stability, and a socially advantageous marriage. My younger sister, Tessa, effortlessly collected these accolades. She was a corporate lawyer, married to a surgeon, with 2 bright children and a house that looked like it had been lifted from a magazine. I, on the other hand, had chosen a path of intellectual pursuit over financial ambition, a decision my mother never quite forgave me for. Our weekly phone calls were a delicate dance of veiled criticisms and my own quiet deflections. "Are you seeing anyone, dear?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting it was a professional failing. "You can't just bury yourself in those dusty old papers forever." I didn't see it as burying myself. I saw it as preserving myself. The world outside often felt too loud, too demanding. The archives were my fortress. But sometimes, in the deep quiet of a Friday evening when the last researcher had gone and the only sound was the clock on the wall, a profound loneliness would settle over me like a fine layer of dust. On one such Friday, that feeling was particularly acute. I'd spent the day painstakingly restoring a series of 19th-century botanical illustrations, my fingers stained with pigment binder and my shoulders aching from hunching over the delicate pages. The work was fulfilling, but the silence that followed was heavy. My mother had called earlier, a conversation that left the usual residue of inadequacy. Tessa had just been made partner at her firm. They were vacationing in Tuscany. What was I doing? Still playing with old drawings in a basement. I locked the heavy oak doors of the archives behind me at well past 7. The evening air of Port Blossom was a welcome balm, cool and laced with the briny scent of the nearby harbor. The city, with its historic cobblestone streets and elegant gas lamps flickering to life, was usually a source of comfort. But tonight, the vibrant pulse of the waterfront district felt alienating. Laughter spilled from restaurants where couples leaned close over candlelit tables. Groups of friends ambled along the boardwalk, their easy camaraderie a stark contrast to my solitary state. Instead of heading straight for the bus stop, I felt an uncharacteristic pull towards the more bustling part of the city. I told myself it was to clear my head, to walk off the stiffness in my back. But a deeper, unacknowledged part of me craved a connection, however fleeting, to the life teeming around me. I was walking down a narrow, crowded lane lined with boutique pubs and art galleries when it happened. My mind was adrift, replaying my mother's words, when the door of a particularly stylish bar, the Gilded Quill, swung open with force. A man emerged in a rush, not looking where he was going, and collided squarely with me. The impact sent my leather satchel flying. The clasp gave way, and its contents, my wallet, my keys, a worn copy of Virginia Woolf's The Waves, and, most devastatingly, a folder of carefully arranged printouts of the illustrations I'd just finished restoring, spilled across the damp cobblestones. "Oh, for heaven's sake," I breathed, the day's frustrations coalescing into a sharp point of anger. The printouts, my meticulous work, were scattered, some skittering perilously close to a puddle. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to gather them before they were trampled. "I am so sorry," a deep voice said beside me. The man was crouching too, his hands moving to help. "I was in a hurry. I didn't see you. Here, let me." I looked up, ready to deliver a curt remark, but the words caught in my throat. I was met with a pair of startlingly kind green eyes, flecked with gold, set in a face that was a study in handsome distress. He had dark, slightly tousled hair and a day's worth of stubble that didn't look unkempt, but rather intentional. He looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a well-tailored tweed jacket that seemed at odds with his frantic exit. "You might try looking where you're going," I said, my tone softer than I'd intended. "These are for a presentation on Monday." "I really am an idiot," he said, his brow furrowed with genuine remorse as he carefully stacked the papers he'd collected. He paused, looking at one of the floral illustrations. "These are beautiful. Are you the artist?" "The archivist," I corrected, taking the stack from him. "I restore them." I began stuffing everything haphazardly back into my bag, my earlier sense of order completely shattered. "Still important work," he said, his gaze shifting from the papers to my face. "Working late on a Friday, too?" I gave a short, mirthless laugh. "It's what I do. It's quiet. No one to rush home to." The admission hung in the air between us, more vulnerable than I'd meant it to be. He nodded in understanding. "I get that." His expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened slightly, his focus shifting to something over my shoulder, back towards the entrance of the Gilded Quill. A knot of tension appeared in his jaw. In an instant, his entire demeanor transformed from apologetic to urgently strategic. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I am about to ask you for a completely insane favor. Please, just play along." He took my arm, his touch surprisingly gentle yet firm. "Walk with me. And whatever happens, please pretend you're my wife." Before I could process the absurdity of his request, or even form a protest, a woman's voice called out. "Reese, there you are. We thought you'd vanished." A stylish couple was approaching us. The woman was sharp and elegant in a silk blouse, the man beside her broad-shouldered and smiling. The man now holding my arm, Reese, straightened up, his arm tightening around mine in a silent plea. He turned to the couple with a practiced ease that belied the panic I'd seen in his eyes moments before. "Sabrina, Grant." "Sorry, I just stepped out to meet my wife," he said smoothly. "She just arrived." 3 pairs of eyes, Sabrina's, Grant's, and Reese's, all swiveled to me. The world seemed to slow down. 1,000 rational thoughts screamed in my head, "This is absurd. Walk away. Tell them the truth." But another voice, a quieter, more reckless one that had been silenced for years, whispered, "Why not? What did I have to lose? A lonely walk home? Another evening of silent reading?" For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I chose chaos over order. I summoned a smile I hoped was convincing. "Lena," I said, extending my free hand to the woman. "It's so lovely to finally meet Reese's friends." The relief that washed over Reese's face was almost imperceptible, but I felt it in the slight relaxing of his grip on my arm. A strange, exhilarating sense of complicity sparked between us. His wife. Sabrina's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, swept over me, taking in my simple trench coat and worn leather satchel. "Reese, you got married? And you didn't tell us." "It was a bit of a whirlwind," Reese said, his hand finding the small of my back, a gesture so naturally intimate it sent a shiver through me. "Well, you can't just stand out here," Grant boomed, clapping Reese on the shoulder. "You have to come back in for a celebratory drink. We insist. We need to hear the story of how our most resolute bachelor was finally captured." I felt Reese tense beside me, but Grant was already herding us back towards the entrance of the Gilded Quill. There was no escape. We were going back in. The bar was all dark wood, burnished leather, and low, golden light. It was the kind of place where conversations were murmured over expensive cocktails. We were led to a plush corner booth, and soon a round of drinks was on its way. I ordered a glass of Malbec, its dark, complex flavor a fitting match for the evening. Reese ordered a scotch, neat. "So, spill," Sabrina said, leaning forward with a predatory curiosity. "How on earth did you two meet?" We were all convinced Reese was going to end up a charming, eccentric recluse with his blueprints and old buildings. Reese and I exchanged a fleeting, panicked glance. The stage was set, and the spotlight was on us. I decided to take the lead, anchoring our fiction in my own reality. At the university library, actually, I began, the lie feeling surprisingly natural on my tongue. We both reached for the same book. "Oh, how romantic. A first-edition novel." Sabrina cooed. "A rather dense text on Palladian architecture, I'm afraid," I said, venturing a guess based on her comment about his blueprints. Hardly the stuff of poetry. We argued over who saw it first. Reese jumped in, picking up the thread seamlessly. She was formidable, he said, looking at me with an expression of fond exasperation that was shockingly believable. I was completely intimidated. I ended up conceding, but only if she agreed to have coffee with me so I could pick her brain about it later. And the rest is history, Grant concluded, raising his glass. How long ago is this? Here was our first test of synchronization. 1.5 years of dating, Reese said confidently. Almost 2 years now, I corrected gently at the exact same moment. An awkward silence descended on the table. Sabrina's smile tightened. 2 years, Reese recovered quickly, giving a self-deprecating laugh and squeezing my hand under the table. She's right, of course. Lena has a much better memory for these things than I do. We were married 3 months ago. A small ceremony, just family. A toast, Grant declared, oblivious to the near miss. To Reese and Lena. As we clinked our glasses, I felt a heady rush. We were pulling it off. The rest of the hour was a masterclass in collaborative improvisation. We constructed a shared history out of thin air, weaving together threads of our real lives with elaborate fictions. I talked about our shared love for rainy Sundays spent in museums. He invented a story about a disastrous hiking trip where I, a city girl, had been terrified of a squirrel. When Sabrina asked about her home, Reese began describing a modern loft downtown, but I quickly interjected, he's still trying to convince me. For now, we're perfectly happy in my cozy, slightly too small apartment near the university. It has character. And no room for my drafting table, Reese grumbled playfully, earning a laugh from Grant. There was something profoundly liberating in the act of creating this shared narrative. For one night, I wasn't Lena Croft, the quiet archivist who felt perpetually on the sidelines of life. I was Lena, the cherished wife of a handsome architect, a woman with a life full of shared jokes and quiet intimacies. I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years, my usual reserve melting away under the warm glow of the bar and the thrill of the deception. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and a fleeting moment, Sabrina and Grant announced they had to leave. There were promises of dinner parties and couples weekends, invitations we gracefully deflected. As they disappeared into the Port Blossom night, Reese let out a long, slow breath, slumping back against the leather booth. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure, unadulterated relief. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his green eyes locking onto mine. You were incredible. A complete natural. You weren't so bad yourself. For a resolute bachelor, I teased, the adrenaline slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a warm, pleasant buzz. So, who are we hiding from? An ex-girlfriend. He winced slightly. Something like that. Sabrina is best friends with my ex, Isabel. It was a complicated relationship. She thrived on drama and public perception. If Sabrina had seen me there alone, Isabel would have known within the hour, and it would have been spun into some pathetic narrative about me pining away. I panicked. It was cowardly, I know. It was self-preservation I offered, understanding the impulse to control one's own story more than he could know. In any case, I think you owe me for the near ruin of my botanical illustrations. He broke into a genuine, heart-stopping smile. I owe you far more than that. You saved me from a world of headache. And, honestly, he admitted, his gaze softening, it was the most fun I've had in a long time. Me too, I confessed, the truth of the statement surprising me. It was a nice vacation for myself. The silence that fell between us was different now. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was filled with the lingering energy of our shared performance, a quiet hum of connection. Well, I said finally, gathering my satchel. My fictional life has been delightful, but my real one involves reorganizing these papers before Monday. Of course, he said, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He stood as I did. Let me at least get you a cab. It's the least I can do. There's no need. I don't live far. We walked out onto the street, the night air feeling cooler now. The crowds had thinned. At the corner, under the soft glow of a gas lamp, we stopped. Well, Lena, he said, his voice softer now. It was a strange way to meet, but a real pleasure. You too, Reese. We shook hands, a formal gesture that felt comically inadequate after the intimacy of our shared lie. His hand was warm and strong, and he held on for a beat longer than necessary. Then, with a small, almost shy smile, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, a strange ache in my chest, before turning in the opposite direction, my mind replaying every detail of the impossible evening. I walked home not as Lena Croft, the lonely archivist, but as Lena, the woman who had, for a few hours, lived a different, more vibrant life. And I found myself wondering if a taste of that life would be enough. The weekend passed in a haze of unreality. On Saturday, I meticulously reorganized the botanical printouts, the familiar, methodical task a grounding force against the chaotic swirl of my thoughts. My apartment, usually a haven of comforting quiet, felt different. The silence seemed to echo with the ghost of a shared fiction, of invented laughter and playful arguments about a non-existent drafting table. I kept replaying the events, the thrill of the improvisation, the startling ease with which Reese and I had built a world together, and the undeniable spark of connection that had crackled beneath the surface of the lie. On Sunday morning, my mother called, right on schedule. Tessa sent me the most beautiful pictures from Florence, she began, her voice bright with second-hand pride. The children look so grown up. You should really think about taking a proper vacation, Lena. Not just a long weekend to a dusty conference. The archives are sending me to a symposium in Boston next month, I offered, knowing it wouldn't suffice. That's for work, dear. It doesn't count. Have you met anyone? Joined a club? Anything? Normally, her questions would have left me feeling defensive and small. But this time, something had shifted. The memory of Friday night, of being seen as witty, desirable, and part of a pair, was a secret armor. I'm fine, Mom, I said, and for the first time, my voice held a note of unassailable conviction. I have to go. I'm meeting a friend. It was a small lie, but it was for me, not for anyone else. It was a boundary, a line drawn in the sand of my own life. I hung up the phone feeling not defeated, but empowered. On Monday, the world returned to its normal rhythm. The archives were cool and quiet, the scent of old paper a familiar comfort. Yet, I felt a restless energy humming just beneath my skin. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting, what? I wasn't sure. By Tuesday afternoon, I had convinced myself the entire episode was a bizarre one-off, a strange and wonderful story I would one day tell my non-existent grandchildren. A fluke. That evening, as I was letting myself into my apartment building, the concierge, a kindly older man named Mr. Peterson, called out to me. Miss Croft, a delivery for you. He handed me a long, elegant white box. I took it, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a breathtaking bouquet of white tulips and deep purple irises, an echo of the colors in the botanical illustrations I had dropped. My fingers trembled as I found the small, cream-colored card tucked among the stems. The handwriting was a strong, elegant script. For my wife, it read, I feel it's only fair that I treat you to a proper first date, one without an audience or the need for creative storytelling. Though I admit, I'm quite fond of our story. Friday, 8 p.m. The Corner Nook Cafe. Please say yes. My real life feels awfully dull without you in it. Yours, Reese. Below his name was his phone number. I sank onto the bench in the lobby, my satchel slipping to the floor. I read the note again, and then a third time. A slow, wide smile spread across my face, a genuine, uninhibited expression of joy that felt both foreign and wonderful. He had remembered the name of my apartment building from our fabricated conversation about its character. The thought, the attention to detail, was more intoxicating than any compliment. I spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I found myself standing in front of my closet, dismissing every sensible, muted outfit I owned. On my lunch break on Thursday, I did something completely out of character. I walked into a small boutique and bought a dress. It was the color of a stormy sea, a deep teal silk that draped softly and made my gray eyes seem brighter. It was not a practical archivist's dress. It was a dress for a first date. Friday evening arrived, cloaked in a soft drizzle that made the city lights shimmer on the wet pavement. The Corner Nook Cafe was a hidden gem, tucked away on a side street, with warm lights spilling from its large picture windows. It was exactly the kind of place I would have chosen. He was already there, seated at a small table in the back. He stood when he saw me, and the smile that lit up his face was so genuine it chased away the last of my nerves. He looked even more handsome than I remembered, dressed in a simple dark sweater that highlighted the gold in his eyes. "You came," he said, his voice full of a relief that mirrored my own. "It seemed rude to stand up my husband," I replied, slipping into the chair he held out for me. The awkwardness I had feared never materialized. The fictional intimacy we had created seemed to have paved the way for a real one. We didn't have to break the ice, we simply had to thaw it. "I have to confess," he said after we had ordered wine. "I was terrified you wouldn't text. Or that you'd think I was a complete lunatic." The thought did cross my mind, I admitted, smiling. "But I was also terrified you wouldn't get in touch. Which is probably more lunatic." We talked for hours. We unspooled the fictions from Friday night, laughing at our near misses and surprisingly synchronized inventions. Then we began to replace them with truths. He told me about his work, his passion for taking crumbling, forgotten buildings and breathing new life into them. He spoke of architecture not as a science of lines and angles, but as the art of creating spaces where life could happen. I saw a parallel to my own work. We were both custodians of stories, his in brick and mortar, mine in ink and paper. I told him about the archives, about the quiet satisfaction of my work. And, to my surprise, I told him about my family, about Tessa and my mother, about the constant, low-grade pressure to be someone I wasn't. It was a vulnerability I rarely shared, but with Reese, it felt safe. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. "It sounds like you chose a life that's authentic to you," he said when I finished. "That takes more courage than fitting into a pre-approved mold." His words landed in a place deep inside me that had long been starved of validation. He didn't pity me or try to offer solutions. He simply understood. That first date bled into a second, and then a third. Our courtship was a gentle unfolding. He took me to see a building he was restoring, a dilapidated old maritime exchange on the waterfront. Standing amidst the dust and debris, he described his vision with such passion of soaring ceilings and light-filled atriums that I could see it as clearly as he could. I, in turn, took him into the deep stacks of the archives, a place few were permitted to go. I showed him the university's founding charter, its ink faded, but its purpose still clear. He traced the delicate calligraphy with his finger, his reverence for the history palpable. In these shared moments, we found a deep and resonant common ground. We discovered the small, wonderful details of each other. He learned that I hummed, slightly off-key, when I was concentrating. I learned that he had a ridiculous fear of spiders, but would bravely rescue a moth from a lampshade. We took long walks along the harbor as autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, our conversations meandering from philosophy to silly childhood memories. With Reese, I began to feel a sense of expansion. He didn't try to change me, but his presence in my life inspired me to push my own boundaries. I found myself saying yes more often, to trying a new restaurant, to attending a jazz concert in the park, to simply sitting in silence on a bench, watching the world go by together. One evening, after a particularly trying phone call with my mother, I was quiet and withdrawn. Reese didn't press. He simply made tea and sat with me until I was ready to talk. "She wants to know when I'm bringing you home to meet the family," I said, my voice flat. "It's not a request. It's a summons. For inspection." "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. The old Lena would have acquiesced, endured the inevitable comparisons to Tessa, and spent a week recovering from the emotional fallout. But the woman I was becoming, the woman who had bought a teal silk dress and played the part of a confident, beloved wife, knew she had another choice. "I want to wait," I said, the words feeling solid and true. "I want this," I gestured between the two of us, "to be ours for a little while longer. Before it becomes a performance for them." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Then that's what we'll do. Your timeline. Your terms." It was a revelation. A relationship that wasn't about meeting expectations, but about mutual respect and the protection of something precious. The boundary I had set with him gave me the strength to set one with my mother. The next time she called, I was ready. "Mom, I am very happy right now," I told her, my voice calm and firm. "And when I am ready to share that with you and the rest of the family, I will. But for now, I need you to trust me. And I need you to stop asking." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. But for the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like disapproval. It felt like space. Space I had created for myself. Months melted away, winter's chill giving way to the tentative promise of spring. Our relationship was no longer new and fragile, but something deep and rooted, a quiet, sturdy thing that had grown in the space we'd so carefully cultivated. We had built a real life together, one far richer and more satisfying than the fiction we had invented on that first night. The climax of our strange beginning came not with a bang, but with the quiet inevitability of a small city. It was a Saturday in early May, and the Port Blossom Historical Society was hosting its annual fundraiser, a gala held in the grand ballroom of a restored Gilded Age hotel. Reese, as one of the city's most respected restoration architects, was a guest of honor. And I was his date. I stood before the mirror in my apartment, smoothing the lines of a long, elegant navy gown. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had trudged home from the archives all those months ago. Her eyes were brighter, her smile less guarded. She looked happy. Reese arrived, looking impossibly dashing in a classic tuxedo. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over me. "You look beautiful, Lena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not bad for a quiet archivist," I replied, a playful glint in my eye. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and black ties. We mingled for a while, Reese proudly introducing me to his colleagues, his hand resting possessively at the small of my back. There was no pretense tonight, no need for invention. This was real. We were getting drinks when a familiar voice cut through the chatter. "Well, if it isn't the happy couple." I turned to see Sabrina and Grant heading towards us, their faces beaming. My heart gave a little jolt, a phantom echo of that first night's panic. But it quickly subsided, replaced by a calm certainty. "Sabrina, Grant, how wonderful to see you," Reese said, his arm sliding around my waist. "We were so hoping you'd be here," Sabrina said, her eyes appraising us. "My goodness, you two seem more in love than ever. That newlywed glow hasn't faded a bit." Grant laughed. "So, are you ever going to tell us the full story of that bookstore meeting?" It all seemed so serendipitous. Reese and I exchanged a look. It was a silent conversation, a quick, shared memory of the lie, and a mutual understanding of the truth. There was no need to confess, no need to explain the bizarre circumstances of our meeting. Our reality had become more powerful than our fiction. Reese smiled, a slow, easy smile that reached his eyes. He looked down at me, his expression full of a love so profound it felt like a tangible thing. "Actually," he said, his voice just for the four of us, "the real story is even better." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The way he looked at me, the way my hand was tucked so securely in his, the undeniable truth of our connection, it was a more eloquent answer than any story we could have told. Sabrina and Grant looked from his face to mine, a flicker of understanding in their eyes. They saw not a fabricated story, but the undeniable evidence of a deep and abiding love. Later that evening, we danced. As Reese spun me around the floor under the glittering chandeliers, I rested my head against his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over me. I thought back to the woman I was, the one who lived her life in carefully catalogued boxes, terrified of straying from the path. I had been so focused on preserving the past that I had forgotten how to live in the present. That chance collision on a cobblestone street hadn't just knocked my papers to the ground. It had knocked my entire, carefully constructed world off its axis. Reese's ridiculous, desperate request had been an invitation, not just into a lie, but into a different way of being. It was a dare to be spontaneous, to be brave, to be someone other than who I was supposed to be. As the music swelled, I looked up at him. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" he murmured, his lips brushing my hair. "For the dance." "For bumping into me," I said. He pulled back slightly, his green eyes searching mine. That was the luckiest, most clumsy thing I've ever done. We left the gala long before it ended, walking hand in hand through the quiet, sleeping streets of Port Blossom. The air was soft, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Our shared silence was as comfortable and full as our conversations. My life was no longer a fortress against the world. It was an open door. The quiet moments I had always cherished were still there, but they were no longer tinged with loneliness. They were now punctuated by shared laughter, by the warmth of another person's presence, by the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of a life truly lived. I hadn't needed a hero to save me from my quiet existence. I had just needed a catalyst, a chance encounter that gave me the courage to save myself. And as we walked home, our future stretching before us like the endless, shimmering expanse of the sea, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that our real story was only just beginning.